Hello, welcome to another installment of Modern Western Buddhism. Installment. That's hilarious. Today we're going to be covering retreat yet again. More generally, we're covering dwelling in a conducive place, right? So you have already spent, if you've been with the course for a while now, you've already spent quite a long time figuring out, okay, how do I get the correct information to understand what it is I'm doing to train in meditation? You spent quite a long time understanding, okay, now that I've got some of the right information, how do I get motivated and stay motivated to bring this process to completion? And now we're talking about the external conditions. What are the most favorable external conditions to be able to actually train in meditation? And if you haven't already attained the first jhana or the first level of samadhi or the first level of shamatha, whatever term you'd like to use, if you haven't attained a state of single-pointed concentration on a virtuous object, then initially, for the first time, you're going to need to go into retreat for some period of time, right? So my interest then is hopefully to give you enough tools in your ordinary life that you can take absolutely as much of your ordinary condition and turn it into further training as possible, so that the amount of time you need to spend in retreat when you go into retreat to try to attain calm abiding for the first time will be as short as possible. Yes? Because I think for most lay people, if they go into a 3-month retreat once in their life, that's probably the longest retreat they're ever going to do. For most people, if they do 1 month, that's once again probably the longest they're ever going to do. And most people, probably between 7 and 14 days is once again the longest they're ever going to do. So I think with these longer retreats, it just gets more and more rare. And so then the question is, well, what about the rest of us, right? What are the rest of us going to do if we, for whatever reason, aren't going to be going into 6-month retreat or 1-year retreat, much less 3.5-year retreat to try to accomplish certain things in our training? Well, you're not actually out of luck. It can be done in the midst of your ordinary activities with punctuated retreats at specific times in your training. So say the great yogis, right? But it is so much harder. That's the catch. So much harder. Because why? Well, because the external conditions aren't set up in an ideal way. And so that's what we talked about last time. What does it mean to be in retreat? Well, retreat in Tibetan is kind of cleverly, the term is actually boundary, right? So it is a boundary that you've put on your physical body, your speech, or your mind. That's what a retreat is. And so this should make sense out of some of the things we're going to say today, some of the arguments we're going to make today about being able to bring retreat into your ordinary condition without needing to go somewhere else. But that being said, it should be noted that if you've never attained calm abiding, never even gotten close, you don't really have any real sense of what it is we're talking about when we're talking about being able to focus your mind, then you're really going to have an extremely difficult time, I think, trying to just immediately jump into doing something in your daily life and have that have some real effect on your training, right? You're already looking for a rarefied state of mind you've never had, and now you're trying to have it in the midst of all of the ordinary states of mind that you have in your life. It's probably not going to work unless you're extraordinarily lucky, let's say. So last time we covered boundaries, right? We said basically you don't want to make, if you go into formal retreat, you don't want to make your boundaries too tight nor too loose. If they're too tight and you squeeze yourself and you push really, really hard, there's a lot of modern stories about this. There are a lot of historical stories about this. Basically, you'll make yourself sick. You'll do something to your frontal cortex, and it just becomes almost impossible to make decisions for a period of time. You break out in cold sweats when you even think about doing something that requires you to like organize your thoughts. uh, Physically, you feel lethargic. It's bad, and it wastes a lot of time. So even when you start getting into doing some retreats on a shorter scale, you want to make sure that the intensity of those retreats matches your capability. You want to be pushing your capability, and you want to be pushing it in retreat well beyond, well beyond what you would normally do, because that's part of how you get the benefit. At the same time, you have to sort of start to learn what your absolute boundaries are. You want to get the tension of the string, right? Like we were talking about the musical analogy last time. You're tightening the string to be able to play the music. And you want to tighten it in retreat, basically so tight that it's just on the verge of snapping, but it doesn't. And if that feels too dangerous, then wind it back a little bit, right? So you need to be intelligent about this so that you basically come out of your retreat having gained some actual benefit and not feeling like you need to take a break for months to recover from your retreat. That's useless. That's worse than useless, right? You went into retreat for a week and now you need to take like 2 months of doing nothing because you did a retreat, right? It should be the opposite. You should get out of retreat and go, okay, I thought my capability level was here. I thought this was, if this is 100%, I thought, okay, I'm operating at about 70%. I'm pushing it, right? But I'm not pushing it to the point where I'm breaking. And then you find out in retreat, oh, actually, my capability is not here anymore. It's here. So to have 70% effort every day now, I need to step it up to here, right? So retreat should be this thing that, in my opinion, helps you reset your sort of self-image, right? You look at yourself and you think, here's what I am, here's the box that I'm in, here's how much capability I have, here's what I can do and I can't do. And retreat just sort of not shatters that, but it cuts holes in that, right? It deconstructs that a bit. And then you get out of retreat and hopefully you carry forward some of the new level of capability, some of the new understanding, etc., out of the retreat. So push hard, but don't break yourself. That doesn't help. We talked about all the components of sort of a perfect retreat or meditative training environment where you have easy access to food, water, clothing, medicine, good shelter. What else? We talked about that in some places it recommends a vegetarian diet and in other places it doesn't. So, obviously if you're taking vows that require you to be vegetarian while you're in retreat, then stay vegetarian. A good shelter in particular means that basically there's something protecting you from the vast majority of the insects and animals and maybe even sort of dangerous people that may be in that area, so that there's no extra layers of distraction while you're trying to place your mind on an object, keep it there, intensify your ability to keep it on the object, and so on, right? And if you're the type of person who believes in things like evil spirits, then obviously you don't want to stay somewhere where you think that there is such a being. If you're afraid of spirits and you think there's an evil spirit there, it's going to interrupt your training, whether or not there is an evil spirit there. Let's see. Obviously, I think for both psychological and other reasons, that a place where a person who has actually attained realization in the training that you're doing is a better place than one that's just sort of a neutral place. or at a minimum, a place where someone in your Buddhist tradition has come and blessed that place, basically sort of purified that place for you to do your training there. I think that's an extremely helpful thing in the beginning, because it gives you extra confidence, extra faith, extra motive, right? And sort of psychologically cleans the place for you a bit, and may actually do more than that, but we need not talk about that. In the same way, on the opposite side, you don't want to be in places where there, really bad things have happened for psychological and perhaps other reasons. Yeah, reasonably good climate. It should be a climate that you can adapt to, unless the type of retreat you're doing. For example, maybe you're doing Tumo training, and it's important that you be in an extremely cold environment for that portion of the training, or what have you, right? So unless the retreat requires that you're in a certain climate, then choosing a climate that's sort of suitable for your disposition is better. And then having people around, if you're doing especially a long retreat, that are doing the same practice, is a really good moral support, right? If you're going to be training for more than a week, probably, doing something intense, then having other people around that are doing it with you is really, really helpful to keep you on track and help you push your limits. And then seclusion, right? So obviously, if you are right in the middle of especially all of your ordinary stuff, all of your ordinary distractions, this is not going to be a favorable condition for generating single-pointed concentration on a selected object, because there are going to be constant interruptions pulling you away from your chosen activity, right? What you intended to do. So they recommend in a lot of meditation texts that you find somewhere secluded to do retreat, right? And so there are a number of retreat centers and monasteries that are quite remote that you could do retreat in. Also, one of my teachers, actually two of my teachers, have recommended for Western people in particular that, sometimes because monasteries are, how do we say, they're kind of exciting places in a way, because it's unfamiliar, there's new food, there's, language maybe you don't understand, or maybe you do understand, which have, different problems associated with them, and so on. And so they recommended just get a hotel room. If you can afford to do so, rent a hotel room in a quiet hotel in a short distance out from the main part of town, and stay in that hotel room, eat the breakfast buffet or whatever, and do your retreat, right? They said, I've had two teachers say, actually, not only is that a good way to do it, it's the best way to do it. So I think I haven't taken that advice personally, but the two people who recommended that to me are highly accomplished meditators, both of them, extremely highly accomplished. So it's good advice. Okay, let's carry on. Give me a moment. Okay. Okay. So this is going to be a short one. So focus in, pay attention. We're doing this thing called calm abiding. The mind should calmly abide on the teaching. So let's say that either for the foreseeable future, maybe years, you're not going to be able to do a retreat away from your life. You need another option. You need an option in the midst of what you're doing, right? Amidst your daily life, there has to be some type of training that is taking you closer to a state of calm abiding. And that's what most of this work is about, right? Most of this work is not about hitting the target at the end of the day. It's about taking all of the appropriate steps that will eventually lead to the result, right? If you just keep taking the steps. And then it's just a matter of time. So you don't need to do extra things. You just need to keep applying the method again and again and again. And as your character transforms, you will take different actions. As your character transforms, you will pursue different types of activity. And so maybe it will become possible because of who you are in a very practical way, not some sort of weird spiritual way. You'll just become a type of person who will go into a retreat long enough to get the result. But that's not who you are today, right? So today, as a person who probably doesn't see themselves going into long retreats for the foreseeable future, you need something here and now to do. So what is that here and now thing you can do? So many people think, I cannot do a retreat. There is no time. I have work, friends, kids, responsibilities. So yes, I mean, if you're talking about the most intense types of retreat, then you're right. You know, you might never be able to do those in this lifetime. You might not be able to do those. So what do? Well, one of my teachers recommended something. I can't remember the term that he used. It was funny though, something like lazy person's retreat or something, because he's very self-deprecating. But if you engage in this type of retreat, then you'll see that lazy people probably couldn't do this at all. So remember that the term retreat in Tibetan, it means boundary, right? It just means boundary. It doesn't mean that you're in a cave somewhere, right? A cave may be a boundary you have set, but a cave by itself is not a retreat. The retreat is that you have set a boundary that you're not going to leave the cave, or that you're not going to leave a certain area around the cave, etc., etc., etc. Right? This is the point. So how do you apply this same principle in the midst of your ordinary activities? So as an example, let's say that your main distraction is that you cook really elaborate meals, right? And that you watch Netflix and you spend too much time on social media, okay? If these are your main issues, then one type of retreat could be simply that you're going to, for example, take Mahayana one-day vows, which involve basically cutting out a whole bunch of small distractions, right? We don't need to talk about the full set of conditions, but you know, you're not going to be doing things like watching Netflix and screwing around on social media. Also, as part of the Mahayana one-day vows, your cooking should be relatively simple, simpler than you would normally do, and you're only eating, depending on how strict you want to be with the vows, you're either eating before the sun reaches midday, right? So if the sun reaches midday at 1:30, then all of your eating needs to happen before 1:30, or or you're only having one meal that day, and that meal must be before 1:30, say, right? So if the sun is at high noon let's just make it simple and say at noon, right? The stricter version of the vow, you would maybe have breakfast and lunch, but you have no snacks in between, and then you don't eat for the rest of the day. The less strict version. The more strict version, you would then have your only meal of the day before noon, and then you would have no more meals the rest of the day, no snacks, etc. You could have some juice with no pulp in the after hours, and you could have diluted milk, right? So if you had like a little bit of milk in some coffee or some tea, that's okay. But you shouldn't have a glass of milk. This should be just a small amount, right? You can also have a little bit of sugar in your coffee or tea after hours, just to keep the mind going. But the digestive system, the whole purpose of this actually is to give the digestive system a break for a period of time. And so this actually gives your mind more juice, more clarity, because this giant organ that would normally be sort of fudging stuff, through the system, is temporarily taking a rest. So there's more energy to train. Also, the body feels very light when you do this, especially towards the end of the day. And so your thinking and your ability to focus gets very clear, right? So as long as you're not sort of pushing it too hard for your level of capability. So again, if you're starving by the end of the day and you can't sit, you can't focus, you can't do anything, then have 2 meals instead of 1 meal, and make sure to have some milk or juice or whatever throughout the course of the day. Okay, so again, quite a simple way to do a small retreat. You for a day, for 3 days, for 7 days, for a weekend, for a month, for 100 days, whatever is suitable to the type of thing that you're trying to get done. You maybe take certain vows, or you cut something off for a period of time. Like, okay, I'm not going to watch Netflix for a month, or I'm not going to do X for this period of time. Some things in the long run you may cut out completely. There's a video way back where I said, look, you're trying to get your mind to calm down and rest on some object without jumping, looking for the next pleasure. So if the rest of the time when you're not sitting on the cushion, you're constantly chasing pleasure in a desperate attempt to try to make your mind feel good, then it's almost like you're eating potato chips all day and then you go to the gym for 30 minutes like a couple times a week. Is there any chance you're going to get fit? No, there's no chance, right? So you may need to have some mental hygiene to attain this state. And some of that mental hygiene may need to be permanent. It may not be just cutting out Netflix for a month. It may be, for example, that you need to stop watching pornography entirely. It may be that you need to stop playing video games entirely. It may be that you need to cut out certain things that for you are extraordinarily damaging, distracting, addictive, whatever it is. Maybe you're addicted to fast food, I don't know. This is something you need to look at for yourself. And the more capability you gain, the more ability you'll have to look at yourself and go, oh, wow, that's a big problem. This thing that I do all the time, big problem. And so then you can take a retreat from your main problem. Is this making sense? I hope this makes sense. This is pretty easy stuff. This is not heavy-duty philosophy. This is very sort of practical. Okay. So my main teacher used to say all the time, you should constantly be in retreat. And it was said somewhere else, the best form of retreat is genuine renunciation in your heart. I can't remember who said this. It's one of the, I think, more recent yogis of the Tibetan tradition. So genuine renunciation, let's start with this. Genuine renunciation comes from the contemplations, some of them that we were talking about in the motivation section, right? Where you're no longer enchanted by chasing after pleasure with your 5 senses, or your 6 senses, really. Mentally, you're not even chasing after the fantasy of mental images as a form of pleasure seeking, right? Because you've become entirely disenchanted with the idea that if you could arrange all of these things properly, that you would finally feel satisfied and happy and fulfilled, and everything would be just right. And as long as nobody moves maybe puts the toilet paper roll the wrong way in the house, then I'll be happy. I mean, it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. There's no way to arrange absolutely everything in the world so that you won't be upset and that you'll feel stable and psychologically fulfilled. It's not among the possibilities. And the more you cling to that as being among the possibilities, the more you suffer. So the solution is to think about that fact from 50 different points of view and really take it apart, put it back together, look at it from this way, from that way, boom, 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 until it's just obvious that the only thing to do is work with your mind, that everything else will just be like putting a band-aid on a broken arm, right? Only fixing the bones will fix the problem. Everything else is just a bunch of band-aids on the on the surface of your arm, right? Your arm is broken. You can't fix it by just patching some pleasure on top. You've got to fix the bone. And the bone in this case is that our mind is constantly chasing things that can't fulfill. And attaining calm abiding is part of the process of just stopping the mind long enough to clearly see what's going on, right? And it should be fairly obvious how these two things relate with one another. On the one hand, you're chasing absolutely everything you think will make you happy around the entire planet all the time. And probably, if you're at least of a younger generation, you're constantly reading the news and posting stuff on the web about all this stuff that you hate constantly, and talking to everybody in the world constantly about how it is that you're going to fix the world. But you can't even put your mind on your breath for like 4 seconds. We have to start with ourselves. We have to start with our own mind. The best form of retreat is genuine renunciation. This doesn't mean giving up on the world in some sort of physical sense, because there are great yogis who have lived very ordinary lives in some ways. There are great, great practitioners who have lived seemingly ordinary lives. They were, just grandma to a lot of people. And then at the end of their lives, they demonstrated some of the most extraordinary attainments of meditative capability, right? And nobody knew. So this can be done in the midst of your life. It doesn't mean giving everything up, but that guarantee you that grandmother had renunciation. Nobody knew. It's not something you can see. It doesn't mean that you empty your bank account and give it to the people down the block who have less money or whatever. That's not what it means. So we'll talk probably quite a bit more about renunciation, but in brief, renunciation no longer thinks and believes that there is any type of sensory experience or mental experience of sort of a mental image of some kind, right? Like basically a fantasy about the 5 senses. That could possibly be the answer to how do I attain happiness, right? Also, at the same time, it no longer believes that simply by either becoming non-existent, right? Now, a lot of depressed people think, well, if I kill myself, I'll become non-existent, and then my problems will also be non-existent, and we're done, right? But according to both some excellent scientific minds and Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist meditators, more important than philosophers, that's not the end. You can't escape by ceasing to exist, because the mind continues. The mind is not the brain. The mind continues on. So, on the other hand, there are those who cling to some type of permanent rebirth, right? The mind continues on, and so they think, if I can just form a relationship with the right deity, then I'll end up in a permanent rebirth where everything is blissful, everything is beautiful, I get everything I want, whether that's singing with the angels for all eternity or it's, whatever. So both of these viewpoints from a Buddhist meditative perspective are incorrect. There is no such thing as a permanent rebirth. There's no such thing as a permanent heaven. There's no such thing as a permanent hell. There's no such thing as a permanent state in which you might be said to be non-existent. All of those are fantasies. The reality is that when you take rebirth, it's all temporary. Every single rebirth is temporary, right? And so you have to become disenchanted with the idea that that simply being a good person is enough. Nothing wrong with being a good person. Ethics and character are the foundation of the training. Without that, you can't do the rest of the training. But it's insufficient. All it does is get you another rebirth like this one at best. So you have to do more, right? So renunciation says, I don't just want another rebirth, right? I don't just want to try to cease to exist. I don't just want to try to get to some kind of heaven. I don't just want another human rebirth like this one where I can train. I want to get out of this problem forever by solving it, right? I want to get out of the problem of ignorance, of mental affliction, of karma, and rebirth entirely, right? So if you've done that, you have drawn a big boundary. Yeah, you've drawn a huge boundary in reality, where you're no longer seeking those types of things, no matter what condition you're in. So that's retreat. So when my mentor used to say, you're always in retreat, or you should always be in retreat, he meant something more like this, that you're constantly drawing a boundary internally in this sort of way. At least this is what I think. Sometimes, who knows, I could be wrong. So he also used to say, physically and verbally, we're not always in retreat. Obviously, physically and verbally, you're not always in retreat, but mentally, you can always be in some type of retreat, right? If you can't generate renunciation, okay, that's fine. But maybe this week you can decide that you're not going to watch Netflix and you're going to do 2 sessions a day instead of 1 session a day. And you're just going to do that for this week, nothing crazy. And no matter what happens with the kids or with the work or whatever, you're going to get the butt on the cushion at the designated times, and you're going to sit on the cushion, period, for 1 week, right? That's retreat. That's retreat in the midst of your life. Now, this sort of retreat can evolve over the course of a lifetime into a much more sophisticated form of practice, where there's really no difference between when you're in retreat and when you're not in retreat. Or there's really no difference even between when you're doing training on the cushion and when you're doing everything else, that all of them are within the realm of the same exact type of mind training. Of course, this is highly advanced, but this is where it goes. This is where it leads, right? We don't meditate to become good meditators. We meditate to gain freedom. Once you have a taste of freedom and you can generate those states of mind that are freedom in the midst of ordinary activity, then the cushion is not as important as it was. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be doing a lot of sitting probably for the rest of your life. You will, if you're serious about this. It's very unlikely that, even if you're among the very best of students, that you're going to do absolutely everything that needs to be done in this lifetime. Those types of students are just incredibly rare and incredibly astonishing, usually from the time they're born. So that's probably not you and me. Okay. So towards the end of my teacher's life, he lived in easy retreat, right? Really all the time. Most of the time, he ate his meals before noon, even though I don't think he was taking Mahayana vows every day. I mean, when he could, he was spending sometimes 16 hours a day. And I think very often, many, 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 many days in a row, doing study, contemplation, meditation back to back to back. And where there was very little or none of his time that wasn't being devoted to training. Every single thing he was doing was the training. no matter what it was. So these little sort of punctuated times where you have elevated effort will have a profound effect on your training, slowly, slowly over the course of time. You're not trying to win the war today, right? You're trying to, before you can become a saint who lives in pure spontaneity, right? First, you need to have the type of character that can penetrate the nature of reality in such a way that all of the habits, right, including the good ones, eventually dissolve of their own. But first, you're going to need to be a super, super hard person, right? I mean, when you look at what the Bodhisattva's qualities are and what the 10 perfections are in the Theravada and what the 6 perfections are in the Mahayana, it's just astonishing, right? If you look at what the character of these people has to be to do this training, it's just astronomical. I mean, it boggles the mind, right? Where their generosity is so profound that if somebody asks them, and it's a good thing to do, that they'll literally take their eye out and just hand it to the person, right? I mean, it's just mind-boggling. There are stories like this from the old days. And there are examples like this from modern times. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, for example, basically, if anybody shows up at his door and says, hey, I really need money for this, he just gives it to them. He just says yes, right? Where giving away something is like reaching your hand in this pocket and putting it in this hand and putting it in your other pocket. It's as easy as that. Ethics for the great beings is like breathing, you know. It's not even something by and large they consider anymore. It's just how they are. They look at reality, they see it as it is, and they act based upon how things actually are. And that's ethics. Now, of course, that requires a lot of explanation, because I'm not just saying, like, you know, sort of the normal thing, oh, you see, you call it like it is, and blah. No, that's nonsense. That's like lumberjack self-help. That's not that's not what we're talking about. When they look at a situation, they see that it's empty of inherent existence. They see that it's momentarily existent. They see the actual final nature, the ontology of the situation, and then they act out of the ontology. So there can't be a mistake in the action because there's no mistake in the perception. And then if they have clairvoyance on top of that, then they know. They already know the past circumstances. They know the predispositions. They know what this being actually needs. And so they're doing that. Right? So that's ethics at a profound level. Again, way above where we are today. And then there's patience and effort, right? I mean, the stories about how patient some of these beings are. Dromtompa, for example, I think he spent a decade or 2 decades meditating on one topic, just training in one singular meditation topic to generate one particular type of quality in his mind, right? Something like 20 years. That's the type of patience that he had. He didn't have it fully mastered. He didn't have it fully generated. And so he just kept going at it. This is astonishing. Right? Most people sit down to try to do even just like following their breath, and they quit after a couple of months because they go, oh, I'm no good at this. But people like Dromtompa, you know, not only do they train hardcore with good teachers and get the best advice and, you know, spend a lot of time, energy, and money and whatever to make sure that they have the very best resources available. But then when they're putting it into practice, no shortcuts, right? No shortcuts, no sort of trying to rush it along. Just here's the step that I'm on, here's the next step, and I'm just going to keep doing this step until it's been accomplished, period. Doesn't matter if it takes 50 years. It's astonishing. And then perseverance, same thing. When you look at the stories of what some of these great beings are willing to endure and have endured, did endure, are enduring in order to gain realization for the sake of, really for our sake, for the sake of beings like us. It's absolutely mind-boggling. So those are the qualities that you need. The ability to endure pain, the ability to endure difficulty, to endure boredom, doing the same thing again and 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 again. Yeah. Until you do it properly. Period. Slowly, 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 slowly. You're building up the right type of character, becoming the right type of person with the right type of personality traits to be able to do the work at the level that the work will be accomplished. And it's not magic, right? Like if you're chasing your emotions all over the place, like some asshole, there's no chance you're going to be able to place your mind on an object and get it to stay there. First, you need to be able to control your outward behavior. Yes? If you can't even control your outward behavior, how are you going to control your mind? It's absurd. So you need ethics. This is part of why you need ethics. It's not rocket science. The other thing is, if you do a bunch of terrible crap, even if at the time you don't feel bad about it, if you start training in meditation, you'll hit certain points in your training in meditation where it will become obvious how you really screwed that stuff up. And then you'll have intense regret. And the regret will interfere with you gaining calm abiding. It'll interfere with you gaining concentration, right? So you need the ethics up front. Anyway, so all of these qualities are quite practical like this. They're not actually like some weird religious thing. It's not like you're trying to counteract the deadly sins or something. This is very earthy. If you don't have patience, how are you going to do this? Because this is going to take years, and it's going to hurt. And you're going to have to give things up that you would rather be doing. If you don't have effort to carry through the acts that need to be carried out, how are you going to get this done? This is going to require a lot of effort for a long time. It's like the understatement of the millennium. I digress. So what are we trying to do with all of these little mini retreats, these mini activities of controlling our behavior, of controlling our speech, of controlling this, controlling that? We're building up the qualities in terms of character that we need to be able to accomplish the training at a later time. So we're laying the foundations again and again and again. And we're slowly increasing our capabilities again and again and again. And we're slowly sort of, the freight train of reality that we're sitting on now is like headed in this direction big time. And we're slowly putting the brakes on and trying to turn it to head the other way, right? So slowly we're turning from a life of almost entirely being distracted all the time towards a life of sort of being engaged in virtuous activity and mind training all the time. Hold on, my dog's having a bad dream. Oh boy. Hi, buddy. That's okay. So slowly, as you'll see somewhere it talks about reducing distractions, right? And obviously dwelling in the right conditions about reducing distractions. Slowly, you're turning your life into a condition that is suitable for training in meditation. Yes? If you're eliminating the distractions that are part of the problem keeping you from gaining the state, then you're headed towards the state. This should be straightforward, not magical, not counterintuitive, very intuitive. In terms of a sort of practical thing, if you can't do long seated sessions, then retreat can also include all sorts of other things, right? So retreat is not just doing seated meditation. For example, we had months of discussion on motivation, right? So you need to sit down and actually study these topics one by one and generate, okay, here's what motivation means. Here's what intention means. Here's what the different types of laziness are. Huh, okay, what's the worst one for me? What type of laziness do I do frequently? Ah, yes, okay, so for me, it's perfectionism. I won't do it unless I can do it perfectly. How do I overcome that? What's the antidote to that? Well, I could think about impermanence. Okay, so now I'm going to jump over to the Lam Rim approach, or I'm going to jump over to the path of purification, and I'm going to read the big section in those texts on how it is that I overcome laziness. In particular, for example, looking at the mindfulness of the body, looking at personal impermanence. There's not a lot of time. So even if you can't do it perfectly, you need to start working at it. Yeah. There's just not a lot of time for the training, period. And if you don't start doing the work, you're not going to get the result. If you don't start doing the work, pretty soon you're going to be an older person. You'll be a lot less capable because your mind will start to get more foggy. Your body will have a lot more pain. So it'll be a lot harder, maybe impossible. And then you die. And then you're right back to rebirth. You're right back to all the circumstances that probably won't help you at all. As a matter of fact, if you read the text, this text basically say, you might as well think this is your only chance to get this right. You might as well. It's not that it is, but the time scale between this attempt to get it right and your next attempt to get it right, if you don't get it right, it's so long you might as well say this is your only chance. Okay, I digress. So what else can you do? Well, if you're in the Tibetan traditions, there are these preliminary practices that are just immense. They're immense. Each of them is working on attacking the issues that are stopping you from making progress in your training in a slightly different way. So just as a small example, we were talking a minute ago about generosity, yes? So one of the preliminary practices is that you do a certain amount of offerings. So for example, maybe you do 100,000 water bowl offerings. So in Tibet, people were very poor when Venerable Atisha sort of brought the second wave of Indian Buddhism to Tibet. And so he basically devised this water bowl offering setup so that everyday common sort of Tibetans, everybody could make offerings. Again, Tibet is way up in the mountains. It's not super wet in most of the places. It's covered in snow a lot of the time. It's like a rocky, snowy desert kind of. So offerings of water. Water was, in terms of streams and things and rivers, was very common. So making an offering of extremely high quality water was something that any Tibetan could do. So he devised this practice where you do 5 types of offerings or 7 types of offerings, and you sort of mentally imagine, okay, as I'm offering water in this bowl, it's for drinking. As I water in this one, it's for washing. As I put it in this one, since I can't afford incense, this will represent incense, and so on and so on. Anyway, so this is how part of this offering practice came about and what it means. But what are you doing? You're cultivating the perfection of generosity so that when any being shows up and appears in front of you, or not even in front of you, you become aware that there is a need, that if you can fulfill that need, if you can do something to help, you just do. You don't think about it. You don't consider. You just do what helps because they're there and you have the resources, and right? You remove the hesitation to give, to help, to be of use to others, which then plays back on training and calm abiding. Why? Your biggest problem training in calm abiding is that your mind jumps all over the place. It's running after pleasure of this kind, of that kind, of this, blah, 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 right? The main thing driving that is attachment. Attachment is this term raga. Raga is a mental factor, if we're speaking technically, that exaggerates the positive qualities of some perceptual object. So that could be a person, it could be a situation, it could be an object, right? Just like a thing, like a physical thing of some kind. So this mental factor exaggerates the positive qualities and ignores or sort of downplays the negative qualities. I'm sure everyone's had a friend, because not us, right? We've never done this, but everyone's had a friend who got way too interested in some guy or some girl and was totally ignoring the things that are wrong with that person, and was just, they went gaga. They disappeared practically because they're chasing this person around. You know, this is attachment. This is raga. So our main problem is raga. We exaggerate the positive qualities of all sorts of perceptions. We do this with almost everything. If we like it, we generate attachment almost immediately. Almost immediately. So when you're seated in meditation, the primary problem, probably for the first 15 years of trying to do this training, especially if you can't do a lot of retreat, is that your mind jumps. It jumps to some other object. It jumps to a sound. It jumps to a sensation. It jumps to the thought of that amazing person that you were hanging out with yesterday, right? And you can't keep the mind on what you wanted, because the mind is exaggerating the positive qualities of these other things and chasing those, and your breath is really boring. It's the same breath that it was 20 seconds ago. God damn it, right? So, especially if you're doing a lot of seated training, your object, no matter how interesting it was to begin with, will get quite boring compared to whatever fantasy you have about how things were or how they will be regarding some pleasurable object of the senses. So certain things like preliminary practices where you're doing generosity start to reduce attachment, where you're starting to mentally imagine giving away all of these things that you are currently exaggerating the positive qualities of. Doing that mental act of giving them away over and over and over again reduces the attachment, because you're practicing, oh, you know what? Okay, I'm going to give that away. And you're rehearsing mentally over and over. Okay, I'm going to give that thing that I think is the best possible thing ever. I'm just going to give that away, no problem. And so the attachment subdues, which means that in meditation, the excitement subdues, which means you can remain on the object with more stability. You see it? So in your retreat, you can do preliminary practices. You can do offerings, actual offerings. You can obviously do study of key Dharma topics. So your retreat can be topical rather than a meditative. You could do rumination meditation, an overview meditation, like we talked about way, way, way back in some of the earlier videos, right? That was in the meditation section, the Gom section of the earlier videos. But obviously, if you can't do calm abiding, you're not going to be doing Vipassana. So also during your retreat, highly skillful use of your time. If you have a discipline, a physical discipline like yoga, martial arts, or if you have an art like playing music, painting, sculpture, you name it, sketching, then doing some of that during your retreat in a highly focused way, right? So using your best, most intensely focused mind can feed back on your training on the cushion. It can be very helpful. It basically gives you one more thing where you're cultivating intense awareness of what it is that your mind and body and speech are doing from moment to moment, because you're just bored with your breath, or you're bored with visualizing a Buddha, or you're bored with the other thing. So this is skillful, right? Not only that, having a physical discipline of some kind, it gives you more energy physically and mentally to do the other types of training that you need to do. So very, very skillful to have some type of physical discipline. Also, these two things, they have a feedback that goes both ways, right? If your training on your cushion improves, your physical discipline should also improve. And the things that are occurring on your cushion will start occurring in the physical discipline also. So this becomes an extension of the same thing. They're no longer separate, right? So this is part of how you take the training and the experiences you have on the cushion and bring them out into the real world, is through a physical discipline. It's extremely helpful. Okay. I'm just going to give a few examples. A few examples. One other thing you can do is to pick certain types of activities. You know, maybe it's taking a shower, it's your morning routine, it's your evening routine, it's making coffee, it's cooking the morning meal, whatever it is, right? And you just systematize it. You do it in a certain regimented type of way. You find this type of thing in Theravada monasteries, almost everything practically, because of the Vinaya training that they do, right? Almost everything, from the way that they brush their teeth, to the way they wash their hands, the way they trim their nails, the way they shave their head, the way they put on their robes, take off their robes, the way that they wear their robes, the way that they eat, the way that they wipe their mouth, you know, you name it, all regulated. Why? Because this increases your awareness of what it is you're doing from moment to moment. Then I'm not just going to do it however it occurs to me randomly at the time. I'm going to do it just like this. Yeah. So, for example, Theravada monks, and actually I don't know, maybe Mahayana monks also, they have a vow not to lick their lips when they're eating. And if you try this for a few weeks, you'll probably notice that it's actually pretty hard, especially if you've been doing that your whole life. You just kind of do it while you're eating, right? But they have a vow to wipe their mouth and not lick their lips. You know, like if you get some grease or something on your lips, you have to wipe it off instead. In any case, all of these small things start to create a momentum in a certain direction where you're constantly paying attention, you're constantly being aware, you're constantly increasing your moment by moment awareness of what's going on, which feeds back on the cushion, right? And the cushion also feeds back on your ability to do that in your everyday life. And so these two work together. So now you can maybe start to see, I've got the cushion work, I've got a physical discipline, and then I have everything else. And all three of these things are coming together, constantly feeding back on each other. Then you have the study, and the study is re-energizing, reformulating, remaking the process that you're involved in again and again and again and again. Then you're getting advice from your teachers. It's reshaping, reformulating, blah, 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 blah. And you slowly, slowly grow and change, right? So you can formalize anything. Mr. Whitfield's example he used over and over and over again was, you know, making coffee in the morning. And I mean, he would use this example so many times. But eventually, if you formalize certain parts of your activities, then you can fully engage with the activity without getting I and mine and what I want, what I don't want, blah, 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 in the way of the activity. You're just doing what is most functional. And in maybe the ultimate ironic fact about the universe, one of them at least, is that freedom comes from discipline. Freedom does not come from doing whatever you want. If you want freedom, you have to be able to make your mind do what you choose to do. If you're just chasing your inclinations and habits around, you're not free. You're bound by your inclinations and habits. So first, you have to gain the habit of doing what you intended to do, right? And then, through the force of will you can generate to do what you intended to do with more and more and more of your life. You can then direct this force of will, force of mind, force of capability towards the training more and more and more and more. And these two things feed back on each other. As you do this, the more profound things that happen on your cushion will more and more and more translate over into these types of activities, right? Where you're making coffee, but in the midst of making coffee, you're generating the most profound types of meditative minds that you would normally generate on your cushion, right? So in the beginning, it's sort of like everyday mindfulness. You're like, I'm aware of doing the dish. I'm doing the dish, right? You're not actually saying this. You're not even mentally thinking it. You're just doing, just doing the dish or whatever. But eventually, this becomes a very, very profound practice. So a few examples where this, I think, has been taken to its maximum capability, right? Where a few individuals have taken the absolute maximum possible full engagement with reality and even turn that into how they make a living. It's how they live. One great example of this is Yanagi Soetsu. He was a Zen adept, a philosopher, and an arts and crafts curator, philosopher in Japan. Extremely important guy. I mean, basically, if you think of an art in Japan or Korea, he probably wrote something about it. He's probably respected in that field. He's a force of nature. His book, The Unknown Craftsman, is absolutely astonishing. You should read the whole thing. It's an easy read. It's a fairly quick read too, but I wouldn't read it quickly. Take your time. In any case, he writes of a gentleman named Kichibe, and he says Kichibe's unfortunate wife had been bedridden for 2 years. He himself had swept the house every day, cooked all the meals, washed all the clothes. When a compassionate villager remarked how tiring all this must be, he replied, I do not know what fatigue is, because caring for my wife every day is always both a first experience and a last experience. There is no doing it again, and so I never tire of it. Kichibe then always lived in an immediate moment in the right now. Indeed, living in the right now is the true condition of a person's being. And when they look at an object in the right now, beauty will never conceal itself from them. For beauty is nothing more or less than seeing right now. Thus, one allows impressions to be forever new. From this point of view, an object of art is created by those who look at it, and a person who looks directly, unmitigated by the self, is an able artist. So, when your meditative capability hasn't even reached a very advanced stage, right? You can focus for 20 or 30 seconds at a time. You've done a lot of study on selflessness and impermanence, right? Then, simply looking at some object and looking at it properly in the present moment. So this isn't just being aware of it in the normal sense. This is being able to look at it and get a lot of the conceptual nonsense out of the way. Seeing it is always the first time seeing it, because it's not the same object, because the object is impermanent. So it's something entirely new. It doesn't have an identity somewhere inside of it that makes it what it is, so that it's constantly what it is and what it always has been and what it always will be. There is no such thing. So when you see it, you see the selfless nature of the object. And for Suetsu, right, for Master Suetsu, he's saying, that's what art is. That's what art is. That's what aesthetics are. That's what beauty is. Beauty is the ability to look and see the real nature of the object. Right? He writes a lot about tea ceremony for the same reason. I would also highly recommend the work of Master Fukuoka Masanobu. Usually in English they say Masanobu Fukuoka. So he was, I mean, I call him Zen, but I don't think he would call himself Zen. So he took a profound sort of mind training approach into farming rice and barley in Japan and growing citrus. He also did some poultry, although I don't think he was killing a lot of birds. I think he just had them on the land, and growing vegetables, right? So his words, just in general, just astonishing, you know. But when you read his work and Yanagi Sensei or Suetsu Sensei, when you read Suetsu's work, you really get a sense of what it means to do this work. It's not anti-intellectual. It's not pro-intellectual, right? But both of these gentlemen who are looking at the actual nature of objects through their discipline, right? Soetsu Sensei looking at arts and crafts objects from Japan and Korea mainly, and Fukuoka Sensei looking at farming, right, and the products of farming, and seeing the same nature of reality in the act, right? Absolutely astonishing. This is, I think, sort of how this type of training can culminate in the life of a layperson. And I don't think it's any less profound than somebody spending 10 years in a cave. If you use your head to decide where these plants will go, you will be limiting nature's expression. If you start with the scientific trials, it will take you a very long time to decide what to do, and you will make many mistakes. But if you toss all the seeds together all at once in just 1 year, you will know exactly where the best place is for daikon, mustard, cucumber, burdock, or whatever. You don't have to worry about pH, drainage, sunlight, shade, or even the proper planting time. The seeds know all of that. Nature wants to work for us. If we'd only give it a chance by getting out of the way. It took me 40 years to figure that out, but you can learn it all in just 1 or 2 seasons. The daikon is here 1 year and the burdock is there. The seeds fall, and the next year the burdock comes up where the daikon was, and the daikon moves somewhere else. Birds drop seeds and animals help to mix things up. It's quite wonderful to see. Each season brings new surprises. He also said, when it is understood that one loses joy and happiness in the attempt to possess them, the essence of natural farming will be realized. The ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings. He also said, in order to have natural farming, we must have natural people. So, just an absolutely exquisite human being. I mean, astonishing human being. Master Fukuoka. But you can probably see and maybe get some feel for the similarity between these two gentlemen that I've just pointed out, where they completely poured themselves into their work, and they used the work as a means to access the actual nature of reality, using constant focused concentration on what's actually occurring in the here and now, while getting their ordinary sense of I and mine and what I want, and needing to control how everything happens out of the way, right? This is very common, very, very common to the writings of these great beings. Another absolutely astonishing example of this is the writings of Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, O-sensei, and sushi chef Onojiro. So sushi chef Onojiro had a documentary made about him called Jiro Dreams of Sushi. It's on Netflix. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. If you want to understand what joyous effort is, what effort means, watch this documentary. So this type of ideal is much more understandable, right? I think this type of ideal, where our work, our way of living, the art and craft and martial capability, the type of food that we're cooking, the type of basically every area of our life, slowly, 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 slowly coming into alignment with constant training in wisdom, constant training in concentration, constant training in ethics. Yeah. This is so much more understandable and reachable, attainable, I think, for lay people who don't plan on being in retreat for long periods of time. And frankly, I think Zen and Chan and Taoism, in particular Taoism as influenced, for example, in the Great Reality lineage, the Complete Reality lineage, where it's fused with Buddhism and Confucianism, for example, that all of these are very, 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 very good at basically bringing this into the hands of lay people who don't plan on, I mean, some of them never go into retreat, you know. And in modern times, there are examples like this, even, for example, in the Tibetan tradition, where there are great realized masters who never went into extended retreat. For example, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has, as insofar as I know, never been into an extended, isolated, solitary retreat. And yet, by the reckoning of those around him and his own reckoning, he has made steady progress in his training over the course of his life. Right? If we're not saying that he's already a fully enlightened being, which he may be. He may be saying all those things just because it's helpful for us. It's hard to say. Okay, so to summarize from today, we covered boundaries again, and then we talked about formalized living. Or I'm sorry, we talked about retreat in the midst of life. So we talked about sort of something more digestible than our entire life being the training on day one, right? So something more digestible is you identify some of your worst problems. You decide that for a period of time and your worst distractions that you're not going to do those. And because you do that well, right? Because you do that within your capability, you slowly build up a habit over the course of time that, you know, I can control my impulse to eat chocolate cake. I can control my impulse to watch Netflix. I can control my impulse to not look at social media every 4 seconds, right? Because of this increased impulse control, this decrease in distractions over the course of many years, more and more and more ability to concentrate and to place your attention, blah, 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 is the result. Slowly, slowly, layer by layer, you cut out non-functional action, non-concordant action, and you're left with just concordant, functional, highly functional action, right? That's it. So in the exact same way that a retreatant living by themselves immediately, more or less, externally, stops themselves from being involved in a lot of distracting activities, you're able to stop yourself from being involved in distracting activities in the midst of your life by slowly, slowly, slowly chipping away at them and slowly building capability while reducing sort of the drives that take you back to distracting activities without overwhelming yourself, right? You just sort of, you take it at pace. And then you see where your capability is, and then you increase your activity, and then you gain new capability, and then you push it again, right? And it just comes over time. And it grows organically. That's it. And then, in the big picture, eventually your life can become, or might even go so far as to say should become, one continuous act of training, where you've continually widened the rings of engagement, where it used to just be this little tiny bullseye where you sat on your cushion and that's the only time you're really trying to fully engage with your life. And then you added a little ring where you're going, well, occasionally I do these little retreat things where I like cut out Netflix for a week, or I stay away from social media, whatever. And then you add another ring where you're saying, okay, yeah, not only am I doing those things, but when I do my morning routine, I do it in a very specific way so that I'm highly aware. First thing in the morning, I'm highly aware of what it is that I'm doing. Then you're adding rings and rings and rings and rings until eventually everything that you do, your work, the way that you live, the way that you eat, the way that you sleep, is training and is taking you closer to enlightenment, right? Where every single aspect of your life is in some way driving you closer to the end result of getting out of samsara and attaining full awakening. That's, I think, a model that lay people can relate to much more easily than going into retreat for 3 years. That being said, if you have the cojones to go into retreat for 3 years and you're properly qualified to do so and you have the right type of guidance and all of that, do it. I'm not saying anyone shouldn't do that. I'm just saying that if you think that's not going to be you on this particular life, in this particular life, then this option is still open. And this option is extremely profound. Using this option, you can probably gain enough meditative capability. Maybe not full samadhi, but you can gain enough meditative capability, for example, to realize emptiness inferentially, selflessness inferentially. Maybe even get a glimpse of the direct experience in your best moments of training, which then means that you're on your way out, period, right? It may be 100 more lifetimes, maybe 50, maybe 16, maybe 4, maybe only one more. So this is not an unprofound path or a lazy path or something like that. If because of how you're wired, you're just not going to be one of those people that does the extent retreat thing, then this option is open. It's realistic, it's manageable, and I really hope that there are a few people who watch this and go, wow, I really can do this because other people have done it this way. This is not an unserious way to do it. I can do it quite seriously this way. And that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I hope for everyone who's watching today. Thank you so much.